By going to the film school, I think it was the serious move. Before that, it was like, I guess, a hobby or a dream, more than a reality. I suppose even after the film school, it was difficult to make a name, to get commissioned, I suppose, by the networks. Yeah, I still don't really think of it as a job. Well, I go places and make films about people that somehow tell me something about the place I'm in, really. And I try to learn about the places through adventures in different parts of the world, and then try to explore the place through single characters or sort of single people and their situations. So to try to find the micro within the macro within the micro, somehow, to illuminate elements of what I feel is the interesting and difficult situations in countries. Like in Japan, the homeless thing fascinated me. But to film a homeless person is desperate, and I don't really find much value in filming victims. So to find the character that I found, who had one foot in our world, which is the safety and stability of living kind of normally, and one foot in the danger of becoming homeless, then you could explore those themes in a more interesting way. Yeah, so I spent a long time in Japan looking at Japan, and then the elements and things that interested me about the militarized nation, about the history of the country, and about the lack of politics on an obvious level, were kind of characterized in one person when I found Naoki. And then through a conversation with him about my interests in the film, the themes emerge in the film, I guess. Well, I'm not interested in films without issues, I suppose, and I'm not interested in films without politics. But I'm equally not so interested in films about politics or films about issues. I'm sort of interested in human films that explore the complexities of what make us real as people, but that challenge, I suppose, major stereotypes that we see in the mass media or that we think about. Like when you go to Japan and the assumption is that Japanese are all rich, so you make a film about a person living in a windowless room, working 80-odd hours a week and not being able to really feed himself. And the idea of making a film about poverty in the world's third richest nation is interesting. It challenges all of the notions we have, I suppose. So, you know, those things I think I always think about what surprises me about the places I go to when I first go, and I try to remember them and then think about, well, that's how an audience will feel, I suppose, when they go. And like in war zones as well, you know, there are many things that the news can't show. In a 3-minute soundbite, you just see the graphic despair of death. But in war, when in a character-based film, what you can do is go into a situation of a suicide bombing and see dead bodies, and then with your character, if there was, and there was, in situations, moments of comedy afterwards, you can leave them in, because I think that just shows the real complexity, and there's something about the madness of finding comedy. I think comedy is also a really great tool in all films that's missed a lot in filmmaking, because I think if what I go back to is working in boring jobs in factories, and most people use comedy as a way of passing the time, as a way of, you know, getting by. And that's what people do in most situations that I film in. But often, when you look at films, the filmmakers have somehow missed the comedy in which people exist, and the comedy in which they make light of their situation. If you go on a journey for 9 months with somebody, they think that change is inevitable, but it's not change like they become millionaires. or, you know, I think, of course, they go on a journey that's a reflexive journey. It's very difficult to imagine the process of having the minute concentration of a camera following you intensely, but not just that. I think there's one or two questions that I continually ask over and over again, you know, which is just very basic questions of why. And if someone is constantly asking themselves those questions in various situations, they find themselves in a very, I think they then, what I look for in doing that is eventually a moment of self-reflection for the first time, that you see themselves look into a mirror and see themselves in a way that they haven't because of the process. And if you can film that and see that process, that in itself is a very interesting narrative arc to take someone on. And I think that is the change that maybe comes from the films. But not change like, well, yeah, I mean, physical change. I suppose with the Liberace of Baghdad, when I met him, he had two dreams. One, he wanted to be famous. And two, he wanted to live in America. And I thought both of those are pretty unattainable in Baghdad now. Baghdad looks well and truly screwed. But with this film, possibly attainable. But I never told him this. When the film was accepted to Sundance Film Festival, Robert Redford gave him the invitation. Otherwise, he was stranded. So he got to America, number one, his dream. And number two, when the film was shown and he got a standing ovation, he came down and stood very proud. He wasn't there as the pianist, but he was there. And it gave him that moment of fame. And those moments are really good. With the Japanese guy, I think he'd been left, in a way, lonely, isolated. The films are often they characterize men that are somehow, I was going to say losers. Men that are somehow not particularly doing well, or that have lost their self-worth. And something about a Q&A. There's something about, for me, the end of the journey of the film is them traveling with me and meeting the audience, because it really gives them something back, which is self-confidence in themselves, that they can then continue in their life in some way that they weren't before. So I think that those elements are really important. With the Syrian love story, it was lovely that at the end they'd got divorced. So it was a very difficult process, the end of that film. They hated each other. And the film was almost not going to be seen because of this hatred. And what happened with the Q&A was that we had an invitation to Amsterdam to show the film with a big 1,000-seat cinema, and the family were invited, and she was here on the stage and he was here and I was in the middle, and we brought them back together for the first time with the film. And I think they, for the first time, saw the film through the eyes of the audience, and it started to open a channel between them again of talking. It also gave them an opportunity to talk to audiences about the revolution, about Syria, about the refugee crisis, about the things that they cared about. So it gave them some sort of value and worthwhileness in life. Yeah, it gives in that sense, but it doesn't give them a brand new car. They still moan and say, you know, you're inviting me to Canada, but I've got no fucking money to pay the bills. Yeah, I mean, I think they can change viewers in the ways I've talked about, but I don't think they can change viewers I don't think they can mobilize political change really in the world. Maybe that comes in gradual forms. I don't think in that Michael Moore kind of way that we can use a film to change the world. But we can use a film to change definitely the participants, which could be me and you, and hopefully the community of people that engage in it. I think there are just incremental things like books, I suppose. They're just incremental things that inform you in the fabric of humanity, so that there's certain sequences, usually in a film I'd say, there would be 2 or 3 sequences that stay with you and you think, that really, you know, those little moments that touch you and that make you think about how someone holds a hand or how someone responds or how he was doing this to her, or rather than the big, maybe the big arc as well. I mean, just the human side of the Syrian conflict that's never really seen in the news. Perhaps that informs people as well. I mean, I think on a number of levels, it does that. The Syria film was important because at a difficult time in documentary in British TV, it took 4 years to get the film commissioned. And when it was finally commissioned, it was commissioned by a minority channel called BBC4, which has a very small, highbrow audience. But when they saw the film at the BBC, they decided to put it out after the news on BBC One, which has got this mainstream. And usually when anything's made for One, it's made in a particular way, and it's certainly not made in Syria. And that made me think, wow, here's a film that I've really done in my voice, in my way. It's character-driven, that's going out to a mass audience on BBC One. I was more curious then, how can films really change? Because those audiences probably don't want to engage with Syria. And the reason it went out on One was because it had a character base that almost worked as a character film that was in Syria or wasn't in Syria. And I think that's also the skill of filmmaking, to try to iron out those things, because you face those obstacles all the time. When you go through a commissioning editor's door, they really want a film about that street out there that's the most common experience for those people there. The further away you are from that street out there, the more difficult it is to get that film through the commissioner. And once you've got it through the commissioner, when you're making it, the more difficult thing to get it to your audience is to make it relatable, I think. So if you're in Africa, if you're in Yemen, if you're in Syria, you know, my concern is all the time my target audience. Who am I talking to? How am I going to make this film relatable to the audience? So the Syria film starts like I'd come and I'd joined a media tour and I'd gone on a camel and I was with the journalist, and I say in the commentary something like, the next day I go off into the old city of Damascus and meet Amma. Amma wanted to tell me about his wife Ragda. The next day was 8 months. Now, is that a lie? But in those 8 months, I could tell the audience, the following 8 months, I lived and starved my way through Syria trying to understand this headfuck country. The Arab Spring kicked off and then blah, 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 blah. Or you just squeeze the narrative to make the storyline go. That, in a way, is a small lie. So to make the story work, I suppose you're telling a few small lies, but I would never tell a big lie, I don't think. You know, I mean, like, I suppose, what would you mean? Like, politically, you could say something more. I mean, there's nothing more outrageous you could lie about the regime in Syria. They do the truth the best. I guess Michael Moore, for example, would be tempted to lie, and I could understand why he would be tempted to lie if he's as an ideological filmmaker, for the message to be delivered, I had to tell a bit of a lie. That I can understand those justifications, but that's why when I'm watching those films, I'm slightly cautious, you know. It makes me kind of nervous, not so comfortable. In the Yemen film, the character refuses to come to the protest camp, so we're stuck in the apartment. And I said to him, look, just come and look with me, just come and look. And I eventually just take him and say, come, and it all kicks off. But I filmed that journey so that the audience is aware of me doing this and moving this. And the arc at the end of the film is him saying, thank you for making me come. I've seen this and I've seen this. And so there's this reciprocal sharing that the audience can witness and see. So, you know, my approach is very much fly in the soup as opposed to fly on the wall. I never really knew about films. I just went into a factory and started working in a shit job, boring job, and I started watching the BBC actually and started liking the characters. Plus also, again, in my boring job, I loved the characters in the factory. They were crazy kind of characters and they would entertain me. You know, when you're doing a stupid job and you're fucking having a good, it was just fun. And so when I left that, I took the camera and started to find the characters in my city and had that relationship. And so when I went international, when I went to Iraq and places, I went for the issues, but actually in my mind I was still wanting to find the characters that I would have found in my city, but in Baghdad and in Damascus. And so the same, try to still find that same character portrait that's unusual, because most people go to these places, they want to make a kind of, you know, the usual kind of current affairs, kind of issue-based analysis of the conflict. They don't just really want to go and find two people that are struggling to make ends meet or to have a love story.
Why do you need to travel to distant places to make films?
Oh, you don't really. I mean, it's just, you know, when you grow up in the north of England, you want to go anywhere else but the north of England. So it's just a great, there was two things. One thing I really enjoyed was traveling. So what I did was try to use film school to enable me to film and travel and not have a kind of film crew. The film crew was this obstacle, this kind of hell. So the backpack, the camera and the freedom to travel was the sort of key really. And also really to not make it feel like work. I am doing a film back in the north of England. We had the city, my city in the north of England was this, you know, this UK city of culture, which was where the spotlight was on for the city for the whole year. And I was asked to be the director for the opening of this year. So when we used documentary, we told the story of the city back to the people with animation and projection mapping onto buildings in a square, onto 3 buildings with surround sound over a 15-minute, 20-minute. It was on a loop and it would play, and it was quite interesting. We did that, and that took about a year, and then the opening lasted for a week as a live event. After that, and before that, I'd got commissioned by the BBC and the Film Institute. Both wanted to do a film in the city, and so after being kind of like the top in the glitzy, glamorous world of the show, I wanted to really go into the underbelly of it and find what the fuck all of this means for the poor people of the city trying to do. And I found a factory worker like myself who had a dream of taking a bus to the poor parts of the city to train small kids, young kids, to sing hip hop and express themselves. So I started filming his dream, and his dream ultimately is to get funding from the bus so he doesn't have to go into the factory. So in a way, it's his story is an autobiographical story of mine, and his streets are heroin streets with needles and all sorts of shit. The opposite of the glamorous thing that we started. And I filmed the behind the scenes of my opening thing. So this is the sort of journey I'm on at the moment. It just feels very different. But again, it's just me. And it's sometimes on camera, sometimes off camera, we have many Latvians in my city, and there's the place where I'm filming. His mother is having some work done on the house outside, and all of the men are Latvians, and I'm filming a sequence with her, and we come in, and she says to her son, "The workmen, they just came to my house, they're banging on the door." I open the door, I said, "What do you want?" He's speaking fucking Latvian. I said, speak in English, what are you saying? He can't speak English, I don't know what he's saying. It's this great sequence. These Latvian guys working there for a contractor, but they can't speak English.